Hello and welcome to Adventuring Academy Office Hours. My name is Brennan Lee Mulligan. I'm your humble dungeon master. This is our show where we take a little bit of time to answer some questions that y'all have in the chat and on our Discord and a couple other places about how to run tabletop role-playing games. So happy to have y'all back. A couple little pieces of housekeeping. First, you're on the Dimension 20 channel. Make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to hit that bell so you get notifications about when we put up cool new content. We got cool new stuff. We got episodes of Dimension 20 and Adventuring Hour stuff coming up, and we got new videos in the pipeline for you guys, which should be really exciting and fun. Also, make sure to head over to dropout.tv. We have a great thing going called the Dollar Deal, which you can get for $1 the first month of Dropout. That's crazy. All you could binge all of our, dozens and dozens of hours of Dimension 20 content for $1. My good grief, how cool is that? Without further ado, we're going to jump in here real quick to answer some existing stuff. We'll start. Oh, this is a fun one at first. If you could exist in the world of D&D 5e, what subclass of wizard would you be? Gotta go diviner. Adine Abernant of Fantasy High fame, diviner wizard. That portent ability is just so cool. Imagine rolling a nat 20 and knowing that you could succeed on one thing that day as good as you could succeed on anything. That's a good ability. Do you think that CR is the best way to balance encounters, or is there some other method you prefer to use? So in this case, CR is abbreviated, meaning challenge rating. So for those who don't know, in the last couple editions of Dungeons & Dragons, monsters have had a challenge rating, which is a number associated with them to give you an idea about what party level that is most appropriate for, right? This is sort of balanced on the idea of a 4-person adventuring party. I'm going to tell you right now, challenge rating is helpful as a ballpark, and in practice is not going to help you make an actually challenging encounter. I've gone on the record before and said this. For a combat encounter in D&D 5e to be gripping for viewers, meaning if you're designing an actual play encounter with the idea that people outside of the game will be watching the encounter, an encounter needs to be deadly to even be worth writing home about. The way the game is balanced, in my opinion, is that an easy encounter will be fun for players because they are going to mop the floor with these monsters. As opposed to something deadly where there's, even in a lot of deadly encounters, you're going to see people come back very easily. There's been some people have said that my encounters are very difficult or challenging because I scale them to deadly and higher. But even the ones that people have written as being like, "Whoa, that's a tough dang encounter," the Wall Street encounter. Spoilers, by the way, or light spoilers. The Wall Street encounter in Unsleeping City, or the final fight in Fantasy High. These were so far past deadly encounters. These were all the way out there in terms of their deadliness. In the final fight, again, not going to tell you who it is, but in the final fight of Season 1, the players went in with half spell slots and half hit points and almost took the fight that was way outside of deadly for them, right? And in Wall Street, if the villains hadn't been doing what they were trying to do, the PCs, if they were just fighting to the death, PCs would have completely killed them, no problem. That's where the fight was headed. They would have mopped the floor with them. So I think challenge rating in 5e is a little underpowered, personally. I think that for the most part, especially when you get into action economies of having 6 PCs at your table, your PCs are going to murder. They're going to clean the clock with your bad guys, which can be okay. So you need to start thinking also about challenge rating in terms of like, how many resources do your PCs have? Will they have taken a short or long rest? Are they at full capacity? Is the terrain on their side? Is the environment on their side? That being said, I think that sometimes CR can go the other way, where if you're not taking into account the composition of your party or the makeup, and also certain abilities that have the potential to, like in one series of bad, okay, let's say there's an ability that has characters be affected with the paralysis status or stunned, for example. One set of bad rolls, if they're not allowed to like make saves in successive rounds, you can suddenly see a low challenge rating encounter completely wipe out your entire party. I think that unfortunately there is no way for a DM to not do some sussing out in their head of the actual abilities on the table, the actual damage outputs. When you're making an encounter, balance it not just by the rubric that the game design has given you, balance it. You will know your PCs ahead of time. You'll know what their good saves are. You'll know the abilities that your NPCs and your monsters are most likely to use. It's not bad to do. One thing you can think about with most combats is most combats are 3 or 4 rounds. Run yourself through the likely strategy of your monsters and NPCs through those first couple rounds, and look at your player character's abilities and say, are these guys absolutely going to be toast? Is there a weakness in my PCs that I'm not seeing here that I'll be really surprised by? The last thing you want to do is get into a TPK scenario and realize like this was completely under my ability to anticipate, and I kind of set my PCs up for failure here. The flip side of that's true too. If I set my PCs up for success, and this is not an engaging combat because they were just going to nail this no matter what, right? As in everything, the idea is that your encounters have the same level of risk that makes any storytelling exciting, and therefore, there will be actual risk involved, but your PCs, if they play it smart, can come out on top. That's excellent. We'll go with another one here. How much feedback do you get from your players between sessions? I try to make it a habit to ask for comments and criticisms over what went well and what could have gone better. I do this for my ongoing campaigns and my one-shots / convention appearances. This is a great question. I think PC feedback, player feedback between sessions is awesome. It also is something that kind of happens informally, just if you're like pals with your players. Like me, I think everyone has been in a situation where you're with one of your players out in public and they'll be like, dude, I gotta talk to you about the last session. And all of people's, other friends that don't play D&D are like, oh, they're gonna talk about D&D now. And you have to go squirrel away in a corner and get some hors d'oeuvres because you're at a wedding. This might be very specific to me. But point being, you go talk about your campaign and you're like, oh my God, can you believe what happened? I think that decompression is a very natural part of the process. After you have a great session or a session that people maybe had some issues or problems with. So I think that's very natural. It doesn't even necessarily need to be that formal. As a DM, it's great for you to talk to your PCs about how the last session was for them, parts that were fun or engaging or otherwise. Not just for Machiavellian reasons of like, please fill out this form, on a scale of 1 to 5, would you agree, strongly agree, or something like that. But the information I mostly glean when I decompress with my players after a session is what they were focused on, what grabbed their attention, how their character was feeling if they didn't get to stay at the table, and especially what their plans are for the future. That is really the main thing I think a DM can glean from their players is like, what's your character planning on doing next? Some players will get really cagey. One of my players, Genevieve Casagrande, is extremely cagey because she's like, the DM is the enemy and doesn't want to tell me her plans. But the truth is that I'm usually never doing that to like thwart what they're going to do. Mostly it's so that I can prepare for their plans to work, right? Because if I have some information about what they're going to attempt to do, I can map out those dungeons. I can craft those NPCs ahead of time. So I think also, if you're a PC at a table, contact your DM with what your plans are going to be, because a lot of times, if you're like, we're going to reach out to make new allies in this town that we've journeyed to before, cool. if I have prep time, I'll be able to make some really cool allies for you to reach out to. So I think that the best thing to reach out to for your PCs in your game is, how'd you feel about the last session? What did it inspire in your character to try to do next? Fun, let's go to some other ones. Oh, very cool. John Remmers asks, what is your take on alignments? Thanks, John. I appreciate it. Alignments were much more important in 3.5 and 2nd edition, which is where I started. They're less important now. Like, detect evil and good literally doesn't detect evil and good anymore. It detects celestial, fey, and undead. I understand why they're moving away from it. Look, these alignment systems certainly don't map to sort of what morality really is in our real world, right? In our real world, morality is sort of like a culturally based idea of pro-social and anti-social behaviors. And the law and chaos thing gets even more fuzzy when you try to approximate it to real world ideologies and morality. Where law and chaos, in my estimation, and this is not, I'm not saying this as an authority, I'm saying this as someone that studied philosophy and plays a lot of tabletop games. I think that sort of like good versus evil can be understood on a psychological level as pro-social, antisocial behaviors, and then law and chaos, I think, is maybe more like communal, other-based, might be law, like the idea of like pro-systems, and that chaos tends to be like pro-individual, pro-exception, like what are the exceptions to systems, what are the cases that aren't covered by systems. That might be a little bit too abstract, but I think that tends to kind of cover those, right? So a chaotic good person becomes somebody who is very pro-social, but tends to be individualistic minded and focuses on the margin cases that are not caught by larger systems, whereas a lawful good character is also pro-social, but tends to think about communities, organizational structures, systems, how do we, focus less on individuals and single units and more on broader systems and large scope things. I think alignments, I was talking to Matt Mercer about this, and he basically said that the nice thing about alignments is that they help people that are not used to thinking about things in that way play a heroic character, right? What would my character do? I think sometimes we forget how nice it is for people that don't necessarily take like a duck to water immediately towards the role-playing side of things, to kind of have these older systems that might feel a little bit simplistic, but are helpful if you have never thought about like, oh man, what is the morality of my character? Like, if this world is real, I should take these actions very, very seriously, right? I also think that there's a part of me that's an old curmudgeon that thinks you can never get away from alignment. Because, for example, even in 5e, that's done its best to get away from alignment, you still have the Outer Planes, you still have the Great Wheel, right? So if you have Mount Celestia running clockwise all the way back to Arcadia on the other side, that means that there is a cosmological truth to the table of alignment. So if you're a planeswalker and someone's like, hey man, I believe in relative morality, you're like, no dude, I've been to the City of Doors, I've been to the Mount Celestia and Arborea, I've been to Baator. Alignment is a tangible aspect of a certain segment of reality, being these dimensions that exist in ideological space. You can't really get away from them. That's always kind of a funny thing. I had a character one time that was lawful good that got in a fight because someone tried to pull that Sith move of like, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. And my character was like, I'm detecting evil on you right now. You're working for a Prince of the Abyss. This is tangible. We don't have to be theoretical about this, which is something that you have to consider when you're in those D&D worlds. Z Wong asks, what is your stance on random encounters, especially if they are deadly? Do you think they make the stakes greater? Or do they simply annoy players and waste time? Z Wong, this is an awesome question. Thank you so much for this. Random encounters, if we take the term random encounters to actually mean random encounters, I am very much against them, right? The fact that there can be a potentially character-killing encounter that is completely unrelated to the thrust of the story you are telling bums people out. But random encounters doesn't necessarily mean a wilderness encounter. Doesn't necessarily mean an encounter on the road going to a place, right? What I would say is this. I'm even okay with some encounters being drawn up by an encounter table, meaning they are like rolled by dice, and in that case kind of random. It's your job as a storyteller to make sure that your random encounters don't feel random. Does that make sense? It's your job. What a strange rhetorical question for me to ask. There's no way for you to talk through the camera back to me. I guess if it makes sense, holler in the chat. Give me an S for sense in the chat. So what we want to see there is if you have a place that you want to feel dangerous, traveling through it is ill-advised, and you want to bring up a monster or encounter table to reflect you guys have come to a part of the world that is way more dangerous than normal. Rather than having it be the kind of thing where we're going to roll a dice and then a monster's going to attack if you don't, I would say roll dice to start making the landscape more dangerous. Start having people see signs of monsters. Can they start to be stealthy? Cool, you're being stealthier and now your traveling rate is slowed. You're hunting for food? Okay, well the best places to get food are going to be the places that the monsters know to get food as well. In other words, don't have it necessarily feel as much like a Final Fantasy world map where it's like you're walking, you're gonna hit monsters, full stop, that's it. What you're trying to do in a lot of these situations is what? Tell a story. You're trying to build tension. You're trying to create a feeling of dread. So in that case, make sure that your table doesn't feel like a sort of random punishment that the players never could have avoided. Have them make hard decisions when they go to more dangerous places. They're going to a dangerous wilderness? Cool. What steps are you taking for me to not hit something you don't want on this encounter table? And then if they get really unlucky, then that reflects real life, right? So I think your job is to have those random encounters feel like story points, and to also figure the timetable you're rolling on. If they're traveling for weeks in the wilderness and you're rolling for random encounters every hour, your player's going to be dead before they get to the location they're going to, right? So it's your job to kind of think of managing the story beats of these, right? If you have messed up the statistics of the likelihood of the rolls you're making, and your characters are having way deadlier encounters more often on the road to the dungeon than they are when they get to the dungeon itself, you've kind of screwed up your own story, right? It's like, oh, we got to the dungeon and the dragon was easy. The wolves and stuff we were fighting on the way, we leveled up 4 times on the road to get here. That's just going to feel nonsensical. It won't feel earned, right? So I think use random encounters with a lot of purpose and intention. Sew them into the story. Have it tell a part of your story. Have it feel right for your setting. Omni Arcane asks, hi Brennan, do you have a favorite clan/sect in Vampire the Masquerade? What about a favorite World of Darkness game line, if not Vampire? This is a great question. Gangrel, baby. I love them dirty boys. I love the beastie vampires. I've played a lot of very fun Gangrel characters that I really enjoy. Cool. Let me see here. This next one is going to be M. Blastroys asks, how do I create a large campaign like Fantasy High? Thanks, M. Blastroys. I don't know that I necessarily, with all the love and attention, agree with the premise of the question. I wouldn't say that Fantasy High is a particularly large campaign. Number one, it only had 17 episodes in the first season. It's 8 combats. And after that, the world took place, at least in that first season, in one town. So I'd say that Fantasy High is actually kind of a small campaign. But if you're asking about how you create large campaigns in general, I would say don't worry about the size of your campaign. There's a funny thing I'm going to get finger waggy for a second. There's a funny thing going on around these parts, which is people going like, how do I create a large campaign? Or being like people come up to me all the time and be like, I'm going to run a one-shot. And sometimes people will even say it like, I'm going to run a one-shot so that it's easy. And I go, one-shots are way harder than just doing the first session of a campaign. There's an attitude towards some of these things, which is like people. I think when people say I'm going to do a long campaign or I'm going to do a one-shot, there's always a part of me that goes like, "Oh, child, you claim to know that which you cannot know." In terms of a large campaign, just start. It might not be a large campaign. You guys might, someone might get a job or move or have a kid or something, just start playing. Let the story kind of develop. The 10-year campaign I started running, I didn't know there was going to be a 10-year campaign. We just kept it going. We kept buying back in. And similarly, when you run sometimes people will be like, I want to run a one-shot. Just take it from me. Running a one-shot is way more stressful than just starting a campaign, because with the idea of a one-shot is you're going to bring this story to a satisfying conclusion in X amount of hours. That is not a humble proposition. That is hard to do. So for everyone out there that's sort of like, one-shots sound easier. One-shots are not easier. They are much harder. The much easier thing to do is like, I'm going to run a session. I have an adventure. We'll see how far we get. We'll wrap it up, when we feel sleepy. Like that's a much more humble proposition for most people. So I would caution you, do not fall into the preconception that one-shots are somehow easier to run. They're actually challenging. Let me see here. Emily Price, does that shirt say Borklin or am I tripping? Oh, this should say Brooklyn. No, I'm kidding. There's an awesome artist, Peter Schmidt, who created this shirt. It's one of my favorite possessions in the world. Shout out to Peter Schmidt. Let's see here. Lillian Meyer, is it feasible to attempt DMing for a larger party of 6+ first-time players in a more casual setting? If so, any and all tips would be so very appreciated. Cool. Yeah, you can DM for a larger party of 6+ first-time players in a more casual setting. That's totally fine. So, let me see here. What's going to happen if you have more than 6 players that are all playing for the first time and it's a little bit more casual, right? Combat takes longer the more PCs you have. The more PCs you have, the more their abilities will all benefit each other, and the stronger they'll get. Right? It's almost like exponential. The more you add, the more powerful the PCs get. Right? Their strategy gets more fun. There's more tricks they can have up their sleeve. I would also say that focus at the table gets hard. Side conversations are more likely to happen the more people are in the room. Getting together for further sessions because you have more schedules, right? It's just sort of statistics, right? Like the more people there are, the more likely it is that someone will drop out or have to cancel at the last minute. I would also say that the harder time you're going to have giving people individual spotlight, the more player dynamics there will be sort of at work. I also think past a certain amount of people, it just gets hard for people. People their focus can kind of scatter. So I'd just say take a lot of care and time, energy, making sure people are on the same page. Also try to read the room, right? If people want a more jocular, casual game, that's not the end of the world. It's not a bad thing to have a more casual game. It might be harder to keep people's focus set. Also, past a certain amount of people, if you have 10 people playing, in combat, people might be waiting 45 minutes to an hour between turns. Just realistically, right? Especially if it's casual and people are doing bits and not paying attention and needing to catch up. Casual means longer, right? People are dicking around more. So it can kind of become a feedback loop if you're not careful. Let's see here. There's some other fun stuff here. Gus Grisham. I recently began preparing to run my first big campaign, but I'm worried that the stories I come up with might not be interesting enough. Do you have any tips for nervous first-time DMs? Gus, I'm sure you're going to do great. Nervousness just means that you care. It's perfectly okay to be nervous. I'm sure you're going to kill it. What I would say here is this. You're not coming up with stories. Your players and you are coming up with stories together. Your job, you will be a better storyteller by just listening to what your players are trying to do and enforcing consequences from the real world onto the crazy shenanigans they come up with. It's not your job to be a novelist. It's your job to be a good listener. And it's your job to play the characters in your world truthfully, right? I think that you can be surprised. Just keep a good eye open for what your players are following, where their areas of interest lie. You don't have to lift the whole world up on your shoulders. You just need to be in the moment with your players. That's a great question. Thank you for that. Let's see here. Doing my little DM noise here. This one's from another person. Is that your username? It's a great username. What should I keep in mind if I run a pirate/seafaring campaign? This is great. And this is a wonderful thing. As with everything else, reward player focus. Your players are pirates. Do they just want to get rich? Come up with a lot of cool treasure mechanics. Come up with how do you move stolen goods in this world? Do you have a fence? Like, look up how real life criminals and pirates did that back in the day. Where are the big port cities? How does the economy work? My brother ran a great, Griffin Johnston ran this great pirate seafaring campaign, and he researched maritime stuff and how ships were built and how naval combat worked. And he also looked up like the economies of the different ports and stuff. So our pirates had a lot of tangible toys to play with. However, if you're not interested in doing like a high maritime campaign, but really like a more goofier pirate thing, cool. Come up with shenanigans. Is there a big mountain of gunpowder barrels somewhere? Is there a crazy place where like a, colony of monkeys have come with all the stolen watches somewhere and have made a little sort of monkey colony for themselves, right? You can world building only needs to be logistical and well researched if the tone that you're going for is a realistic one, right? World building does not mean realistic. Realism is a vibe. And if you're going for that vibe, then go realistic. But world building is really about hitting a tone and making people feel satisfied with a world that they can exist in and that feels not necessarily realistic, but truthful. Which is why you can go to the world of Harry Potter and see incredible world building, even though the logistics of that world are mind-boggling. Adults can teleport in this. I've said this on this podcast before. Adults in that world can teleport. They get their mail delivered by nature's slowest flying bird. And I know what you're saying. You can't apparate in the ground of Hogwarts. Fine. There's still owls everywhere else. Why would I ever write a letter? If I have something to say to you, I'm going to teleport to you and say it. Why do we have letters? That's my rant on that. This last one, this will be our last question we're going to do today. This one's from Maxwell Dillard. Thanks, Maxwell. How was it DMing for the McElroys in the upcoming season of Dimension 20? The McElroys are the sweetest, nicest family in the world. It was, look, Dimension 20 premiered a little over a year ago, September of last year. And since then, I've gotten to play with Matt Mercer and the McElroys. It's stupid. It's a dream come true, and it's very silly. I'm going to be honest with you. I was watching Critical Role and listening to Taz for ages, and I never dreamed in a million years that I would have gotten to go on an adventure with them. It was really fun. Myself and Jess Ross and Lily Dew had such a fun time welcoming those dudes to our CollegeHumor offices here. And the adventure is really insane. There's so many just crazy shenanigans. and we're like so excited to get to show you guys that. It is unlike any other Dimension 20 adventure we've done in terms of like the world we're in. It's this crazy like The Borrowers meets Ocean's 11 6-episode adventure, and I love heist movies so much, and this heist is crazy and also very itty-bitty. Love you guys. Thanks so much for joining. Make sure to go check it out. We got a ton of Dimension 20 stuff on Dropout here on the channel. We have all of our old Adventuring Academy podcasts and everything else. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will catch you guys next time. Farewell, intrepid heroes. Woohoo! Goodbye!